All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, this is going to be another quick and dirty one that's going to go over coolant lines. I'm having trouble getting the intake connectors back off, so this is going to be a little bit of tight quarters. I do have some previous footage that I'll try to cut to, but my dialogue wasn't very good, so this might be a little bit of an awkward video. But thank you for tuning in. First thing to note is that this setup for coolant is only going to work if you are running a naturally aspirated 07K swap with the intent to include heat in your car. There is a forum post, which I'll link to here, that has all of the other possible methods, like if you're running a turbocharger, or if you're trying not to run heat, or you're naturally aspirated and you're not trying to run heat. There is a distinct setup that Alan, one of the creators of the kit, laid out in exact detail. But for this, I plan on running naturally aspirated, and I plan on running with heat in the car. This is going to be a car that I want to drive pretty much every day if I can. So creature comforts are super important. So for this setup, you're going to need a couple of things, including some 5/8 hose, as well as 3/4 coolant hose. I've got some of it there. That's the 5/8, and that's the 3/4. You can see that they're just a little bit smaller. Pretty much every hose is going to be that size except for a handful of them, which I'll tell you about momentarily. You're also going to need a couple of formed hoses. I'm going to try to remember to put a diagram, but all of the parts for this will be in the comment section below. So let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so once again, apologies for the difficulty of seeing underneath the intake. I do have videos on the vacuum lines that are coming shortly, but for now, this is going to be the best we can do. We can see more from the bottom as well. All right, so starting with the back, you can see that we have a hose, a formed hose in the back there that's currently clamped. That is a Dayco 72365. It is a formed hose that connects to the rear coolant flange and then runs along the the rail here. It connects to another formed hose called a Gates 20416, and you can see that it comes here into this section of the radiator here. One problem is that you can see that it's kind of close to the belts. So what we did is we created a little bit of a bracket that bolts into some screws that were already here on the frame, and then zip tied it into place. In order to actually connect the two hoses together, you're going to need a kit like this. This is like a hose splicing kit. You can get these at AutoZone, O'Reilly's. They're pretty much for sale there all the time. And you're going to need, because it gets bigger, you're going to need, I think, the 1.5 inch connection. It'll be in here and you'll know which one it is. And then you'll hose clamp it down. So that's the first line. While we're at the front of the radiator, you can see that this is the stock 944 hose, and it runs along the top of the radiator all the way down into the port on the passenger side where it always went. So this doesn't change at all. On the topic of the radiator, the top of the thermostat housing is where things get a little interesting. You can see here that there is the coolant flange. This is part of the packing list from the Boost Brothers garage team, and it comes out the top here and then connects to this formed hose, which is a Dayco 72193. And you can see that it goes down here to this hose, which I've connected using that same recovery kit, and that goes into the bottom of the radiator on the passenger side there. This hose that it connects to is a Gates 22503, and once again, all these parts will be listed in the description below. Now, this first hose that I was talking about, the Dayco 72193, initially, and I should cut the footage of it here, I had it connected the rubber directly to the coolant flange itself, but when Spencer was here, and I'll cut to that footage here, we decided to take a bar of aluminum. Well, you know what, it's probably better just to let him explain. Alright, so this is the continuation of the coolant video. We had a slight modification that we had to make to the coolant lines. I'm going to let Spencer explain why.
So on the 07K swap, when you have this cast aluminum manifold, it's a very beautiful piece. You have several fittings on the bottom for vacuum/boost. And what we've done here is we've modified the thermostat cover such that the pipe outlet does not come in contact with any of our fittings or the hoses that will be protruding from the actual intake. So what we've done is we've cut the thermostat housing cover right here. And we welded in a couple sections of pipe here, and then we've rewelded the end section of the original thermostat cover onto the end here. And this was done for a few reasons. A, to again mitigate any issues with the intake manifold and any fittings on the bottom of the manifold, and B, to allow us to relocate this hose, the rubber hose, away from the belts and pulleys. When I was originally shaking down and testing out the functionality of my 07K swap when it was naturally aspirated, I was having some issues where the belts were actually coming in contact with the coolant hoses, and they were cutting the hoses, and my engine was overheating at the time. So what I did was I made a similar modification where I relocated the outlet of the thermostat cover away from the plane of pulleys, such that there was absolutely zero potential of the pulleys or belts cutting any of the hoses. This is also when I wasn't using the TTRS harmonic damper, so anytime I smacked the limiter or went past 7,000 RPM, the belt would just fly right off, and sometimes that would cause damage to the coolant hoses. So totally preventative and not really necessary if you limit your RPMs, but Cam wants to be able to smack the limiter and do some cool, hot boy shit. So we did this modification here for future proofing and for contingency mitigation.
So there you have it. If you do, or if you are handy with a TIG welder, then maybe this would be a modification that you can make. Otherwise, like Spencer said, using the tubes that I showed you previously might work. If you want to order this particular fabricated part from Spencer, you can reach out to him. His email will be down here, and he'll give you a quote as to what that would look like as far as fabrication goes. So, is that right? Alrighty, so that's all of the connections that come out of come to the radiator. One final note is that on the top of the coolant reservoir there is a vent hose for vapors. This is like a 5/16 hose, I think, something like that, and it goes all the way back to the rear coolant flange. The stock hose for the 944 isn't going to work. You're going to have to get something that's longer, and it'll fit into place that way. Okay, so now we're moving on to a discussion about the heater lines. So there is something you're going to need to purchase if you're planning on running heat like I am, and it's this right here. This is a GM specific heater valve, and how this works is it is vacuum actuated, which is how the 944 was originally. So there's actual vacuum lines that go into the cab, and you can see that it is here. I will have more information on that in my vacuum lines video, but you can see that it has 4 entrances and exits starting from here. Hey, so Editor Cameron here. I tried to explain this a couple of times, and in the edit I can't make heads or tails of this. So let's cut to current Cameron and get a better visualization of how a heater valve works. Alright, so let me try this one more time. So a heater valve, the one that we have in the car here, actually has 2 different settings, open and closed. When it's closed, vacuum is being applied to the heater valve, and pretty much the coolant is running from the rear coolant flange straight into the thermostat housing. So it's just a little circuit that is essentially keeping all of the coolant inside of the engine. And then from the thermostat housing, it runs through the radiator and gets cooled down. The other way is open, and this happens when vacuum is not applied to it. It's the default setting. And how this works is essentially heat comes out of the rear coolant comes out of the rear coolant flange, and then it gets taken to the firewall where it circulates through the cabin. The heater blower blows the hot air, and then it comes back in through the other port on the firewall before getting directed to the thermostat housing. In this case, these are designed to be default open, so that way if there's a problem, like if the heater valve breaks, you're always going to have heat. That way you're not going to freeze to death if, for instance, that happens if you're in the middle of nowhere on an Arctic tundra. So I always find, jarting these things out is a little bit easier. So that's how these heater valves work. You might want to use a different one, so just be aware as to the differences if you do. Alrighty, so here's the heater valve. I know that this is a little hard to see, and you can see the vacuum line that's coming out of it. This is the one that's actually installed on the car. And what you can see here is I actually purchased a silicone 180-degree hose to go connect from the rear coolant flange into the top. So that way, this is where the coolant is coming from out of the engine. And then another 180-degree rubber one, which goes up into the engine at the thermostat housing. So I sort of have it a little bit reversed. It took up a little bit more space, but the reason why I wanted to do that is that on the other two sides, this is actually going to be easier to show in a diagram. I have the two other lines that are supposed to go into the cab facing directly, so that way they go up and around the bell housing of the car and then back to the ports for this late model 944. And I'll pop over there now. All right, so those are the two ports. One is 5/8 and the other is 3/4. And you can see the vacuum line that is being fed there that came from the heater valve. And that is where the other two ports go. So this is where your coolant is going into the vehicle. Okay, so down below I showed you the other 3/4 inch hose that went into that Silicone 180. This is the 5/8 one that comes out of that same heater valve that also had a 180 and got brought up here, and it connects to this part of the thermostat housing. Now, I mentioned this before, but you need to you need to take the part of the pipe that came with the 07K engine, and it needs to be welded onto a nozzle that'll fit here, and I have the part listed as well. And then once you have that, you can just connect these two together, and then it's held in place with one of these Volkswagen plastic clamps. I've broken so many of these over the course of putting this together, so make sure you have a couple of those in reserve. Alrighty, and that is my coolant line setup. So once again, there will be this diagram here that I will have created to help people out. I know that was really hard to follow in a tangle of pipes that are below, but I don't think this setup is going to change, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to shoot it now. Just as a note, if you're going to try to connect different hoses together, there's two sort of different ways that you can go about it. One is to buy these plastic connectors that you can get out of AutoZone, or most of the time I had to buy them off Amazon just because I was looking for a specific one and they don't really keep them in stock. The other thing you can do is purchase these from hardware stores. These are the, especially for your bigger sizes, dog hair all over it. This is what plumbers use, and they're going to have a lot longer longevity. So when you go to put these in, make sure that you're using proper grease to fit them in place, and then absolutely clamp them down. I mentioned this in my lessons learned video, but I did not realize that hose clamps are something that you can actually put a socket wrench on in order to tighten, and as a result I was just using screwdrivers and basic power tools to try to get them torqued down, and as a result I have leaks everywhere. So save yourself some time, make sure that you're actually using a socket wrench to tighten those closed clamps together, otherwise you'll be tearing stuff apart to get back to your hose clamps. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. That's all I have for today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up in the comments below. I'll see you all next time.